don't get into the American versions of the games that I talk about very much, because, well, the whole reason I'm doing this is to try to spread awareness of Japanese games. But for Dracula II, Noroi no Fuuin, I have to talk about Castlevania II for a moment. Because Castlevania II was the first game that I ever speedran. Oh, we didn't call it that back then. I didn't even get the connection initially between the multiple endings and how much in-game time had passed. I was just a kid who had 4 Nintendo cartridges, played the games I had to death, and realized that the way Castlevania II was laid out to encourage you to play was also incredibly inefficient. Huge portions of the game were optional, and there were quirks of the game design that made some counterintuitive moves the best things you could do. I broke Castlevania II so badly that it was over 20 years later when I found out that you were supposed to actually fight Dracula, instead of just obliterating him a few seconds after he appeared. What I'm getting at is, I know this game. It's been a while since I played it, but I still know it very well. Obviously, Dracula II is the sequel to Akumajo Dracula, which Konami released 11 months previously. Of course, that was a straight action platformer, but now it's 1987, and everybody has to do action-adventure games. So Dracula II is abandoning the evil castle, and getting its hero Simon Belmondo out into the Transylvanian countryside. The plot of the game is that before his death, or second death, Dracula cursed Simon. The curse will eventually kill him, and it will only be broken if Dracula is revived. So Simon has to locate Dracula's scattered body parts, reassemble them at Dracula's castle, and then kill Dracula again for what must be the 3rd time. The subtitle of the game is Noroi no Fuuin, which can be translated as Mark of the Curse. Though as far as I can tell, Simon doesn't have any particular mark. One notable thing about the packaging before we get started is that the background drawing of Dracula is taken directly from the cover of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Module I-6, or Ravenloft. Ravenloft is probably the 2nd or 3rd best known Dungeons & Dragons module, one so widely played that they turned it into its own campaign setting. So Konami wasn't exactly stealing from an obscure source with this one. The big thing in Dracula II is that now you're freely roaming the countryside. The game is still played from a side view, A still jumps, B still swings your whip, Up and B still uses a special weapon, but you're no longer going through a linear series of levels. There are no bosses at the ends of things. Well, other than Dracula. Instead, you'll need to go to town, buy supplies with the hearts that you've been collecting, and then use those supplies to defeat more monsters, which drop more hearts, so you can buy the next set of supplies, and so on. Ideally, as you're doing this, you're also making your way to the 5 mansions around the country, each of which hold one of Dracula's body parts. When you hit the start button, you bring up a menu that will show you the current time, how many hearts you possess, as well as let you equip various items. There are items that you can hold for special effects, and special weapons that you can activate. The time is important because periodically, the sun will set and the world will grow dark. At night, the monsters become much more powerful, but they also drop more hearts. More frustrating, at night you can't enter any buildings in towns, and all of the people in town have been replaced by monsters. So if you have some business that you need to do in town, like buy a particular item, or getting healed at the church, then you might be stuck waiting until morning. For the relics that you can hold on to, there's Dracula's 5 body parts, and a crystal. Dracula's body parts all have different minor effects. The rib, for example, will be used as a shield that can block incoming shots, and the eye can reveal secret items. The effects of the relic only occur if you have it equipped, so you have to keep that in mind as you're making your way through the world. The crystals are all kind of special. You purchase the white crystal in the very first town, and it has the power to reveal invisible blocks that occur in exactly one place in the game. In another town, someone will trade your white crystal for a blue crystal, and at a lake that you'll find as you explore, you can kneel down next to it to reveal a staircase. And then later on, you can trade that blue crystal for a red crystal, and that leads to one of the most infamous things in Dracula II. One thing they did to add challenge in Dracula II is that they gave you a lot of bad information. While there are hint books around that have truthful information in them, there are also townspeople, and the townspeople often lie. So one of them tells you to hit your head against this cliff, and that's where most players got stuck. The actual way to progress relies on that red crystal. Have it equipped, kneel in front of the cliff, and eventually, a whirlwind will come down to swirl you up and take you away. This might be the single most infamous sticking point in any 8-bit game. As for the weapons, there's plenty of whip upgrades for you to buy that will let you do more damage, but because there are so many, you're usually better off skipping and doing every other whip upgrade. The holy water doesn't do much damage, but it does break bricks, making it an absolutely necessary item. It's also very useful for finding holes in terrain where there are illusory blocks covering them up. If you want to do damage with an arcing weapon, then the holy fire is what you really need. That makes a pillar of flame pop up. The dagger does better damage than your early weapons, and it's a ranged attack, which means that this is the one game in the Castlevania series where the dagger is good. Though I wouldn't call that one strictly necessary. If you defeat a particular mini-boss, then you can get a golden dagger, which sticks into enemies and does repeated damage. Using it trivializes Dracula. You can purchase laurels, which are a limited consumable item that make you invincible for a short period. These are mainly useful for getting through the long swampy areas of the game, though if you don't have one, you could always jump. Another consumable item is garlic. It can be used in a few places to summon a person who will give you something. It'll also freeze any enemies that cross it, and that includes the mini-bosses. So when you encounter one of them, drop some garlic, and then they can't hurt you. In the mansions, you'll find someone who will sell you a wooden stake, and you have to purchase one of these because it's the only weapon that can be used to puncture the crystal holding one of Dracula's body parts. Something you'll notice after you do this is that the crystal respawns as soon as it's off screen, and that is true for everything in this game, including the mini-bosses. There are no permanent changes here, and you can abuse that to make a much more efficient run through the game. One more useful thing to be aware of about the mansions is that time doesn't pass while you're inside them, and that means they're the perfect place to grind up hearts. You're also getting experience points and can level up in this process, though you don't get experience if you're defeating weaker enemies. So this is something that will only work for a level or two. Leveling Simon up gets him, a health refill, but other than that it really doesn't matter. As I mentioned at the outset, there are multiple endings to Dracula II. If you manage to break the curse and defeat Dracula within 7 in-game days, then you get the best ending. And if it takes you more than 15 in-game days, then you get the worst ending. If you want to see that good ending, the easiest way to do it is to just get a bad ending and then start over. Because in the Disk System version of Dracula II, you can start a new game in that same slot with everything that you already had. So you can just walk straight to Dracula then. The best thing that I can say about Dracula II is that this is a game that's dripping in atmosphere. There's a lot going on everywhere here. All the locations in the world have a fantastically creepy design, though Konami seems to have been pushing up against the memory limits of the Disk System here, because the mansions wind up looking very much the same. I do have an issue with the stage design in Dracula II. A lot of it relies on narrow hallways where you have to make a big jump with an overhang above your head, which means that a lot of the time you're going to bonk your head and fall down. Now this isn't the worst thing in the world to get used to, but it does make a lot of the platforming feel a bit unnatural. This is just a really odd choice when it comes to that level design. In Japan, Dracula II has a pretty mixed reception. You've got people pointing to it as a key moment in the development of action-adventure as a genre, and people who are still mad about the lying villagers and that cliff face. Dracula II is a game that can be kind of unfair if you don't approach it carefully and methodically. But as I said, I kinda like this game a lot. I do wish it was a little bit more accessible. But with a modern ability to just look up hints, I think it becomes very playable. 10 years later, Konami is going to revisit the idea of free-roaming action-adventure with this series, and that's going to be the one that is hugely influential. But you don't get Symphony of the Night unless you have this as the foundation.